Hi, and thank you to everyone joining us today. We are going to give our viewers a few minutes to join, and while we wait, I'm going to tell you all about Interaction Design Foundation and today's masterclass webinar and our speaker, Donna Spencer. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, the Interaction Design Foundation, also known as IXDF, is the world's largest online design school with over 100,000 graduates. Since 2002, we've been market leaders in design education because the world's best design experts produce our courses and literature, as you will see today. IXDF is also home to the largest global network of design professionals. You can find free IXDF meetups and organized by community members in over 470 cities and remotely. And along with a wide range of beginner to advanced courses in design, IXDF also offers masterclass webinars, like we're going to see today, to help you learn directly from design leaders. So today's webinar also includes a live Q&A with Donna at the end. So be sure to submit your questions via the Q&A button in the Zoom interface. This interface is available to viewers who use the official Zoom client. And to answer just real quick, one of our most commonly answered questions, yes, the webinar will be recorded and you will receive the recording links a few hours after the broadcast ends. Today's masterclass webinar is on the topic of how to use card sorting for better information architecture. You will learn all about what card sorting is, how you should go about it, how it can help you design more intuitive interfaces, and how to apply it in your own design projects. So today you're going to learn to create information architecture that aligns with how users naturally process and group data, which goes a long way in making products more user-friendly. And who better to teach you card sorting than Donna Spencer, an experienced designer, speaker, and the author of Card Sorting, Designing Usable Categories, among other well-known works. Donna works as an independent design consultant, and for over 20 years, she has worked extensively across the entire spectrum of design, from strategy to delivery and just everything in between. And Donna has designed solutions for a wide range of problems with a particular emphasis on information architecture and complex employee experience problems, for which we thank her. Outside of her life as a UX practitioner, Donna is also a regular conference speaker and author of 5 UX-related books, which is so many books to write. And she's also the creator of the popular conference UX Australia, which she ran for 9 years. And without further ado, I will stop talking and I will hand our virtual stage over to Donna, the woman of the hour. Thank you for joining us, Donna.
Thank you very much, Laura. Thank you for that introduction. Good afternoon, evening, morning, midday, good whatever part of the day and world you're in. I'm coming from Melbourne, where today it is sunny. If you have ever visited Melbourne, you know that in half an hour it may not be sunny. It is the most changeable city I've ever lived in, but it's beautiful, and we're in summer and it's really lovely at the moment. So weather chat aside, today we're going to talk all about card sorting. Well, first I'm going to talk all about card sorting, and then you're going to ask me some questions about card sorting. And we'll start with the very, very basics. So you know kind of what my framing is, but also because you may not know anything about this at all. So a card sort is where we give people a set of cards, and of course cards can be digital or physical, so we'll talk about both of those aspects later on. But we give people cards that represent the content that we're trying to learn about and we're trying to work with. We ask those people to group the cards into bundles, to put things together that go together. We ask them to describe why those groups are together. And the most important thing about this is that you learn about how people think about the ideas under question. You understand what things people think go together, and you learn a lot about what people will call those things and how they describe them and what their terminology is all about. This, of course, is super useful for all kinds of projects. So what you can get out of this for a project where you're trying to, do something with content, the main thing you learn from a card sort is really learning about how people think. And I will just keep saying this. We're not necessarily learning about how to make an IA or how to put cards together and content together to make a hierarchy. We're learning about concepts and ideas and how people think about different topics and how their cultural upbringing has made them think in a different way to other people and how their experience in a workplace has made them think about things that are different to other people. So it's really about understanding how people think so that we can then make sure that we arrange our content in ways that make sense to them, like deeply, not just kind of shallowly, but really deeply around how their brains work. So we can understand what things go together and, more importantly, why they're together, again, around that kind of thinking. We can learn different kinds of ideas around how content could be organised. So an example of that, if we were working with music content and we said, here's a bunch of songs, arrange them. We might see some people arrange them by band. We might see some people arrange them by genre. We might see some people say, don't like any of those, toss them out. So we can think of it, learn about the ways that content can be organised, as well as the things that go together within those ways. And importantly, we can understand whether people think similarly or differently. And that's actually a super important and useful aspect of a project, because you can use it for internal politics and communication as well. One of the not obvious uses of card sorting is to show people who have like a really good, deep technical understanding of a domain, to show them that people who don't know this yet think really, really different about it. And that can actually be one of the big findings is you think like this because you know stuff. The people who are using it think like this because they don't. If we arrange it your way, they won't be able to comprehend it. Or even like different teams in an organization, you think that way, they think that way. There isn't a right way to do this. So it's not only about putting content together to make a hierarchy for an IA. There is deeper and more useful aspects for this process. What it's not good for is lazily creating an information architecture. Hey, I'll give people some cards and they'll sort them and that will give us the IA. And we don't need to think about it. You won't get anywhere near consistent enough results to just make an IA, but you will learn things that are interesting. A card sort can't tell you if your information architecture works. A card sort goes into the information architecture, but it can't answer that question. If you want to know if your information architecture works, you would be better with something like a tree test. And if you haven't come across those, search for tree testing. There's some good articles and some good tools. And in a tree test, instead of sorting cards, you say, where in the hierarchy would you look for this thing? And that way you can tell if your IA works. A card sort isn't good for like black and white, definitive, this is the answer. Because people think differently and have different experiences and different ways of looking at a topic, you won't get just one answer out of a card sort. And this is not a statistically valid technique. This is an exploratory technique that you're trying to learn interesting things for your project. Statistically valid techniques attempt to measure whether our sample represents the real world. There is no concept of what is the proper way to arrange content for a real world, so you can't actually check whether your card sort is statistically valid. People have been trying to do this for years and asking, is this statistically significant? How many participants do I need to be statistically significant? It's not a statistics method. It is a learning and exploratory method. I should also say, I apologize somewhat that my slides are really boring, but I find this is a very good way of working with audiences from all around the world who may not speak Australian, who may not understand me. I keep my slides really simple, and then they're also good for looking at later. I should have warned you about that because they're not beautiful, but they've got good words on them. And you can look at them. And when I say something Australian, at least the screen will have the right word. So the first part of running a card sort is to figure out really what you want to learn. Like, I know we always say this about all research techniques, but it is true. I recently was working with a team, and the first thing they asked was, who are we going to get to do this? And they spent ages drawing up a great big matrix of all of the users that they could involve. And I'm like, what do you want to learn though? And they were like, we don't know. So you need to figure out what you want to learn. And then going back 2 slides, is a card sort the right way to learn that? So if you want to learn if your IA works, a card sort isn't the right way to learn that. If you want to learn how do people think, or do these users and these users and these users think differently, or do our users think differently to our internal staff, a card sort is great. So make sure up front that you're just really clear about what you're trying to learn, because that sets up all of your decisions that you make as you go through the process. So as a research technique, there's a bit of planning that needs to happen. So we'll go through this kind of planning, then I'll talk about how you might run it, and then we'll talk about how to analyze it at the end. And having said that, you know, that the weather's going to change in a few minutes, I just saw the light completely drop outside. I'm like, I should have turned the light on, but I will do that if I need. So the first thing you need for a card sort is some cards. I'm just actually grabbing some off my shelf. So we often, if we're doing it face-to-face, I'll talk about this in a sec, use just plain index cards. That's where the name of the activity comes from, like just writing things on index cards and shuffling them around a table. So when you're planning how to do the sort, the content that goes on those cards is absolutely critical, because your results will come entirely from what you put in front of people. And if you haven't thought some of the things I'll tell you in a moment through, well, then you will get kind of bad results that happen because of what's on the cards. So this part is actually the most important part, is really thinking hard about what goes on these cards, whether they're, again, physical or digital. So what we want is content that is all at the same level. So what I mean by that is we need it to be the same kind of granularity, the same kind of part of a hierarchy. An example that I saw a very long time ago that's a good example for this is I saw somebody running a card sort about tourism content. And in the tourism content, they had things like a hotel name, a zoo to visit, a winery to visit. They had some stuff about the geography, and then they had a card called accommodation. So you can think, like, if you've got a hotel, actually I think they had a card of things to do as well. So you have like a hotel card and an accommodation card. They're different levels of hierarchy. A hotel is more detailed than the broad concept of accommodation. So we don't want that accommodation card in the mix, because people will put those together. No matter, like, you cannot stop them from putting a hotel and accommodation together. And then you haven't really learned about the content and the sort. You've just learned that the thing that was going to happen. So you want to make sure that they're, and the level is it's a hard concept, but you can see it in your content. Like, you want either quite detailed things or fairly broad things, but they need to be the same. You want the cards to be a good selection that represents the content you'll be working with in the end. So if you, let's say, if you were card sorting for a supermarket, a grocery store, but you didn't include anything cold, so no frozen foods, no refrigerated foods, and then you ran the card sort, you're going to learn about some things, but you're not going to learn about everything. And then you won't have information to cover the things that you haven't covered in the sort. So you want it to have really good coverage across everything that you're arranging. And this can be hard because if you're working on a site that's large, you need to be able to get good coverage. You also need to I'll jump down to the bottom point in the slide. You also need people to be able to actually group the content. So if you get a good broad selection that covers your content, but then people look at it and they go, well, I can see some chocolate and some apples and some cheese and some tinned foods and things, but I can't make a group out of those, then you haven't learned anything from the activity. So you need to, and this is a juggle, you need to get a breadth that covers your content, but still people can make groups out of. So if you're working on something really large, you might actually, chop it into sections and run different activities. So you might do the fruits and vegetables in a supermarket and understand how people might group those. And you might do the frozen foods in a different card sort to understand how people would group those, rather than try to get everything together. So sometimes for really large content sets, you might need to run a few. Going back up some points in the slide, you want to be really careful not to have jargon on cards, partly because people may not understand it. And if they're not understanding it, then they won't be able to really use their experience to make good groupings. But also because if you have jargon on cards, what people will do is they'll just say, okay, this one says chocolate and this one says chocolate and this one says chocolate. Now that could have been chocolate grapes, chocolate biscuits and chocolate drink powder. But they've just stuck them together because they all have the same word on them. So you have to be careful not to have words that people can lazily just throw together. So I don't know how we would get around that in our chocolate example. Maybe not include all the chocolate biscuits. But yeah, people are going to try to do this activity as quickly as they can because, humans. And if you have just words on the cards, they will just smash them together. So get rid of the jargon because they may not understand, and also because it makes it easy for them to not think about it. And we really want people to think about it. And we also want them to understand the content so that we're getting that kind of deep understanding of what goes together and why. And I've definitely done card sorts where the participants don't know the content well. And what I do then is say, throw away anything that you don't understand and work with just what you do. And that way we'll get really good results from what you do understand. Because people, if they don't understand things, they just kind of stick things together that don't go well together. Of course, you also need to think about how many, again, physical or digital cards you give people. If you're running a card sort, again, with index cards in a room, I know that none of us are doing this right now, but this talk is generic and is going to last beyond us being stuck in our home offices. If you're going to do this face-to-face with people and a pile of cards, I've had decks like this big. It's like 200 cards. You would think that would be way too many, but in physical space, and especially if it's kind of easy content, I had a deck that large for grocery store content. For something that people understand in physical space, that amount of cards is okay because they can spread them out on a table. They remember that the frozen foods are over there and the chocolate's over here, and they know spatially where things are. So you can actually do quite a lot. I wouldn't, for most projects, use 100 cards. It is quite tiring, but the point is that people can remember where they've put things and remember where it is. When we then transfer this to trying to do it on screen remotely, you need to dramatically cut down the number of cards. There is no way people are going to sit and move 200 cards around a screen. They're not going to put the time into it, and they don't have the physical space, even on a really large monitor, to kind of do that spatial thing of, I put those things over there and those things over there. They're always trying to remember on the screen where they've put them, and it just makes it much more tiring. So for an online sort, you want to reduce the cards down, I don't know, probably no more than 50. It does depend on how well people understand the content. The people who you invite to be involved are also super important. Not quite as important as the content, but still very important. As I said, I know that most of us are currently working from home offices, not in physical space, but we will do it again one day. Small groups of people working in person around a table is literally the best thing. And the reason it's the best thing is because you can listen to the people and the conversation that they have, and that conversation is so much more useful than the actual results that you get. Like, we still could do this remotely, especially if people can get together and you can moderate via video. Or we could, I don't know, I haven't ever done this, but we could kind of do it with a Zoom call and like a mural board and get people to poke things around. But it's still, anytime that you have a chance to do it in face-to-face, do that. And one of the things that I like to do if I need to do remote card sorts is just at least a couple face-to-face, because then I can really hear that discussion and understand what's going on with just like some of the group, and then I can look at the results from the others. We want to make sure that the people are also of the same level. And this goes for any kind of group research or group activities. If you have a boss and somebody much more junior, the junior people will always just defer to the boss. If you have technical people and non-technical people, the non-technical people might just go, I don't know, and follow the technical people. So you want to make sure that people are the same kind of levels, and if you can, the same kinds of work or life situation, or the same kinds of users, because then you can listen to them discuss their experiences, and they'll do that better if they're the same types. We do that for most kind of focus groups and things. If you are doing it in person, just don't try to fill up a room with lots of people. Do it with one group or have one facilitator per group, because as I said, the conversation is the super useful part of this, and it's really worth listening. What I used to do when I did these in person is I would kind of just sit up at the end of the table, kind of be typing in results from a previous sort. So I don't look like I'm hovering over them. I look like I'm busy kind of just listening a bit, but I'm listening to every single word they're saying. So again, if we're working remotely and we're doing a remote card sort, you still want to have a good representative set of people, and see if you can figure out a way of getting people to work together remotely. Otherwise, they'll just do it by themselves, one at a time, and you'll still get good results, but you just won't hear them discussing their reasoning. So another preparation step is that you need to set up your tools. You need to get ready with the artifacts and things for the activity. If you're doing it in person, your tools are a big deck of index cards with labels stuck on them. If you're going to be running a couple of sessions, get like multiple decks of cards, and make sure you also prepare the instructions that you're going to run the activity with. And I'll talk in a moment a bit more about the introduction kind of stuff. If you're going to be running online, there are good online card sorting tools. One of the big advantages of an online tool is that the data is already inside the computer. You don't have to take the data from the physical world into the computer. It is just there ready for you to go, and that speeds up analysis. I've seen people use things like Trello. It can work quite well because it has actually kind of cards, and you can see get people to move them around. And I've seen people do things like PowerPoint. Just you make just like squares with the words on them, and people can move them around. But if you can use the tool, I mean, they're built for it, and you'll get that analysis all ready to go. As with physical cards, you need to prepare the cards. So that means getting the content into the system, and you need to write really good instructions so that people know what to do. And you need to be careful about those instructions for an online sort, because they don't have you there saying, oh, no, don't worry about that. Oh, hang on, you did it wrong. So you have to be really careful about your instructions. This is just a screenshot of a tool called Optimal Sort. This is the one that I use most often. And the way this works is that we start off with, I never know which side I'm going to be on a video or on a screen. Anyway, we start off with some things on one side, and participants move them into the middle and label them. I wish I could figure out that. It's like kind of aerobics and yoga, isn't it? Doing things the opposite for the camera. So they drag them into the center, put them into groups, and label the groups. And again, because this is an online tool, the analysis is ready for you. There's always steps, but a lot of it's there. So this is a really great tool that I reckon I've probably been using since the start, and that's probably about 15 years. Always make sure that you test your card sort before you run it. I've been doing this for a long time, and every single time I mess something up. I do something silly like that, different levels of content, or I realize that people actually can't make any kind of groupings, or I realize that they don't understand and I've used more jargon than I thought, or I've like duplicated a card accidentally, or like all kinds of things can go wrong. So always test the card sort, maybe with your colleagues or family or somebody like that, somebody just to like run it through and really test your instructions. Make sure that people understand what you're asking them to do, so that, and this is especially important for online, so that they can do it themselves and get to the end with a good result. Because you don't want people being uncertain and lazy. They may not finish, or they may do it really quick. And then you just won't get good results, but you'll believe them. You'll be like, oh yeah, this is what I learned. But if they haven't understood what to do, those results won't be very good. Running the card sort itself. So let's do in person and then online. The way that the activity works is a really short introduction. So something like, hello, blah, 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 about our project, what we're going to do today. I shouldn't talk with my hands because I often pull my headset out. What we're going to do today is we've got content ideas on these index cards. I'm going to ask you to put them in groups of things that make sense for you. I then spread them out on the table, and then I leave people. I think one of the things that many people do, researchers do often and do wrong, is keep explaining. Like just try to tell a whole lot of stuff at the beginning, and then, but it's really just like, there's things on the table, sort them. The reason I spread them all out is that if you've given them a pile like this, and you stick them on the table in a pile, they will go through these one by one. They'll put it down and they'll say, okay, that's that. And they'll then put another one. They'll go, is that similar? No, it's different. And when they do them one by one thing is that like kind of somebody controls it. So you're getting one person controlling the activity. But also the sort ends up quite different to if you've spread them all out on the table and people are like, oh, that's like that. And that's kind of like that. And that's kind of like that. It's much more kind of fluid when they have to just find things that are similar than if they're going one at a time through. So spread them all out on the table and then just stand back and let them go. An important thing that I do when I do this in person that you can't do online, unfortunately, is I don't tell them that they're going to be labeling the groups, like the things that they put together. And the reason I don't is because language changes categories. So what people will do is they'll go, that kind of is similar and that's similar and that's kind of similar. And this is why you want to listen to the conversation. Oh yeah, and that one's like that as well. But once they need to describe it, they write a label and they're like, oh, well, that one doesn't really kind of fit in there, and they move it. So what you want to know is, what did they put together first before they labeled it? If you ask them and you tell them that they're going to label them early, somebody in the group will like take the role of labeler and write that labels down, and people will start putting the cards into the labels, and you lose a lot of that kind of fluidity of, that goes with that for some kind of reason I'm not sure about. You can't do this online because you need to tell them that they need to label the groups. So again, this is why I like doing these things face to face. Things that people will ask you during a face-to-face sort that you might want to think about up front and have an answer for is, they'll say, this one kind of fits in that and that. Can I put it in two places? You need to have an answer for that because it will affect your analysis. So you need to know whether that's okay or not. What I would usually do is tell them that it's fine, make note of it, and then in the analysis, because my analysis methods need one card in one place, I'll just keep a note of that. Often groups will ask if they, or you'll see them do it, or they'll ask, okay, they've got a group of things and they've got another group of things, but these groups of things go together. This happens a lot if you run it with designers. They start making hierarchies. And so I've done a lot of card sorting teaching, and so I'm teaching designers and they start making hierarchies. Regular folks don't do this quite so much, but sometimes they'll ask. So you just need to have an answer or not. I usually say, no, don't worry. I just want to see what's in the groups, but it doesn't matter if they do. And can they add or remove cards? So I said before that if people don't understand the content they're working with, they can't make a good sort. So I do like to say up front, if you don't understand this, throw those away. And people will often ask if they can add a card, like they know that there's some content missing. So I usually let them do that because I learn something interesting from it. These are just things to think about so that you can either be ready for the question or mention it in the introduction if you feel like you need. While the sort's going on, I've said this a couple of times, make sure you're taking notes, listen. This is the interesting part. And what people will do, you'll see this in lots of researchy activities, is they'll say, what should we do about, does this go with, and they'll ask you questions as the facilitator. Just leave them. I just keep my mouth shut and they go back and they figure it all out. And I learn super interesting things from that. So don't try to overhelp them. It's only putting cards together. So actually running it online, you will have your instructions written as part of the preparation, and tested. So you'll have done all of that. Things to know about running online is people usually do this quickly. Means two things here. You'll send it out, it'll land in their inbox and they'll do it pretty quickly because everybody's looking for a distraction. But they'll also work through the activity fast as well. So compared to an in-person card sort where people have had a good discussion, online card sorts kind of much more surface level. I'll just kind of knock them together and get out of here. It is good. I mean, it's good to provide a reward something, a gift, a thank you for people in person, but online is more important, because if you haven't offered any incentive and they get to the main screen and they're like, oh, there's too many things, I can't be bothered. So there does need to be an incentive for people to finish it, and to do a good quality job for you. And of course, remind people who haven't completed it just before the deadline, so that you can get them as many results as you need. Something else I just thought about that people often ask me, is how many people to involve. Now, this matters a lot for online, because it's so easy just to send it out to many, 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 many people. The thing you can get completely stuck with is too many results to analyze. So if you've got a large pool of people who are available for doing an online card sort, don't send it out to all of them at once. Do a card sort with a small set of people, see what you learn. You'll have some questions, then you can refine it and potentially send it out to some more. This isn't usually as a problem for in person, because you're eventually limited by time. But yeah, I've seen people send card sorts out to thousands and thousands of people and then say, I don't know how to analyze this. And I'm like, you should have figured out your analysis when you planned your card sort. I'm usually a little more polite than that though. Sometimes, maybe. It's in my head though. So figure out your analysis before you send out your card sort, and then you'll be like, oh, I don't think I can analyze it from 2,000 people. So analysis. So as I said, figure out how you're going to do analysis in your preparation, so that you are setting up everything so that when you get to that point, you don't hit a wall and just go, oh, I don't know how to do this. So again, if you've done a face-to-face card sort, you need to get that out of the physical world and into one place. I always use a spreadsheet. Spreadsheets rock. They're flexible, they're useful, you can work in them quickly. I think, I don't have one handy. One of the card that I showed a couple of slides ago, you might have noticed, had a number on it. I have a spreadsheet that has like the number and the card, and that way I can just run through and type the numbers into the spreadsheet really quick. If you are thinking about doing this again face-to-face and need a spreadsheet, there's a URL there on the screen. So I have a spreadsheet on my website that does all this. It's not pretty, but it's pretty damn functional. It works well. It only takes up to about 40 sorts though. So that, again, that matters for how many sorts you'll run. But as I said, online tools make getting the data all in one place fairly easily. So when you're doing the analysis itself, and this is the same for whether you're doing it from an online sort or from a face-to-face sort, the first thing you want to do is just poke around. Just, if you've got it in a big spreadsheet or something, you might print it out on the wall. You just want to look at what happened here. What did people do? What's kind of interesting? What ways did they do things? So just an initial, what is this? You might look through and say, okay, participant 1, how did they do that? Oh, look, they sorted the groceries into the way it's sorted in the physical store, or they sorted the groceries according to taste. Interesting. It's just interesting. Then you might go through and go, what is interesting about those groupings? Ah, wow, okay, this is different to that. I didn't expect to see people put those things together. And then look at like different participants and say, what did people do that is different? Did everybody do exactly the same thing? Did they do all different things? Did they do some similar things and some difference? What is interesting about that? What kind of variations did you notice? And then also, what words did people put on the cards? What language and labeling came out of this activity is super interesting. So as I said, You're kind of just burying yourself in data initially. You're not trying to get to a result really quickly. Then you might go in a bit deeper. So you might compare participants like column by column in a spreadsheet and say, where did this person put that card? What groupings? Like really kind of dig in and look at it in a lot of detail. And you're really after what was similar and different. What did people all do the same? Do they all make an About Us section? I've seen that all the time. There's always an About Us section for a corporate kind of site. And then pick a group, like the grouping. So you might say About Us. What cards did people put into About Us? What cards did people put into frozen foods? This is super interesting because often you'll be, oh yeah, they've used all the same groupings, but you'll often find that people put different cards into those groupings, which is kind of interesting. And then repeat that for all the groups. And then the other way is to like look at a card, an individual card, and say, where did everybody put this card? And go through all of that. So that's quite a lot to do. But this is how you will notice similarities and differences and really interesting things. So as I said, this isn't like statistics. It's not show me a graph of the results. It's, what insights did I learn? Some things that you will definitely notice. People will be inconsistent within their own sort. And this happens more with online sorts than face-to-face. You will see people, I don't know, put frozen peas in one group and frozen beans in another group, where you're like, but those things go together. You'll just see them kind of make mistakes. And it's because they do it quickly or because they haven't kind of reviewed everything they've done. So expect to just see weird things that people have done. People will often, and again, this happens more for online, create really big groups of lots of cards just to kind of get through the activity. So sometimes you won't get nice small groups. You'll just get big, ugly bundles where you're like, oh, that's a big pile of, I don't know. And as I said, they'll kind of rush through and make mistakes. So just expect that you'll see unusual things like that. They don't make the results bad. They just mean that you should expect that there will be things that are odd. The last part then is actually using the results in a project. As I said, they're qualitative and interesting, not statistical. They will not make the IA for you, but they will tell you lots of interesting things that you can learn about your users that will give you options for when you're making the information architecture. So you should be combining this with other things you know about your user research and other things you know about the content. And they can help you explore different approaches to create an IA. So again, if we're doing this for music and you've seen some people arrange everything by band and some people arrange it by genre and some people arrange it by song length, you can go, okay, well, there are different ways that we could group this content. Let's try each of these and see what happens, whether the content works well, whether it doesn't. So give you different places to start approaching the IA. And I'll just leave this slide up a moment while we kind of flick to questions and stuff. So, so I'm just getting this off my shelf. Should have got it before. You can't get this in paper anymore. Don't try on Amazon. It's like very expensive, but you can still get an ebook. It's called Card Sorting, Designing Usable Categories. It's like 10 years old, but apart from screenshots, that it doesn't change. And as I said, there's that spreadsheet on my website that can help you with doing the analysis as well. Thank you very much. It is very funny just kind of projecting to a world and not knowing if you're even there or listening, but we will go to Q&A and I'll see what you have come up with.
Hi. So thank you, Donna. That was amazing. And they were listening, I can tell, because I have been following all of the questions. I promise. And I was listening. I was here. So we have a bunch of great questions and about 15 minutes, but I want to, I'm going to play the host card and I'm going to ask my question first.
Okay, cool.
Because do you have any stories about something really weird or surprising or interesting that you learned during a card sort? I always find that people who've been doing this for a while always have a fun story about something that
I
really
have a lot
surprised
of,
them.
yeah, I mean, every single one I learned something interesting. I tell you one of the funniest that I ever had though. This is just super interesting about how people think. When I was writing the book, so a long time ago, and I had this big deck of grocery store cards that I was using for an example. So I'd get my friends to do this big card sort, and mostly grown-ups arranged the cards, and you could see that they were arranging it by how they, how the grocery store is arranged, like, dried goods and frozen goods and fruit and vegetables and stuff. But my daughter, who was, I reckon, all of maybe 9 or 10, so before she was really cooking, she would have been cooking a little bit. She arranged the whole thing by taste and texture. So she had like soup and custard together because they're both runny. And she had all the sweet things together, like ice cream and chocolate biscuits, chocolate cookies together because they were sweet. And I was like, that is so super interesting to see that her mental model of the world wasn't influenced by a physical store. And that's, I mean, I didn't need to do this for a physical store, but it was, you get that kind of insight for all projects where you're like, I just wouldn't have ever thought of doing that. What an interesting mental model.
What a great example of using somebody who isn't already spoiled by the things that they already know.
Yeah. Yep.
Yes,
Yep.
everybody on your team is also a grown-up who knows things. No. Okay, I'm gonna grab some of the questions from here. So we've got some really good ones. One of the ones that actually came in when you were talking about the grocery store, and I just want to follow up on that, is Alberto asked, he said, looks like the design of the cards content is almost predetermining the groupings that may be possible sometimes. So he was wondering if you were saying that, you already kind of know how the groups are going to come out ahead of the exercise. Is that true? Or
look, it is a fine balance of getting the cards that are going to actually kind of let people make groupings, you have to have enough similarity that they're not just a big pile of things that are unrelated. And if you're working on a big site, that pile of things can be unrelated and everybody stares at them and can't make a group. So yes, by choosing the cards, you are somewhat choosing things that can go together, and you somewhat kind of know what might happen with this. So you need to be just a little careful to keep an open mind and to try not to bias it, so that you can learn about what people do. So if you can do that, like get a good representative sample with enough pairs and groups that people can make groups, then you will learn interesting things. But yeah, it is actually like, I mean, but you're going to be working with some kind of set of content for a website or a project. So you've got boundaries on it anyway. But yeah, it can actually be tricky to do that.
yeah,
It's a really good question.
That sounds hard. I think the answer
It's a real balance.
It's hard. Yeah, no, it sounds like a balance.
Mm.
So a similar question there. Emily asked, can we give the participants the existing content structure for something that already exists and then have them rearrange it to sort of see the difference between the IA's mental model and the participant's mental model? Or is that a technique?
I wouldn't give them the existing structure.
Okay.
Because the moment you give them the existing structure, they're going to be thinking about how it was already structured. Right. But if you give them a big floppy pile of cards and ask them to sort it, you will learn interesting things. So don't give them the structure. They don't need to know it. They need to make sure, sometimes you'll have content in a hierarchy where the content you need to know what its context is. So sometimes you have to rewrite some words on the card so that they're independent and understandable as standalone. But no, they give them the structure. It's not what they need. Your team might compare the old structure and what comes out of the card sort, but not the participants.
Interesting. Oh yeah, that's a good point. Um, so Sven wanted to know what the smartest way was to get users involved in card sorting when you don't have a direct connection to your target group. So especially in B2B.
The perennial user research question, how do we find people to research with?
Yep.
All of the ways that you would think about, if I need to know what my users might do, how would I get to them? So B2B, I mean, who are your businesses? Who is in them? Can you do things on social? Can you use friend networks? Can you use business internal networks? Can you use your sales staff? There is always going to be ways to get to the people at the end, but it's harder sometimes.
Does it always have to be the exact end users, or can it sometimes be people like the end users, or is that a very much a depends question?
It's a depends question.
Yeah.
You will get the results from the people that you do the activity with. So if they're not the users but are kind of like them, in what ways aren't they like them? So let's say your users are people with poor local language skills, and you get somebody to do the card sort with better language skills, you're not going to learn the same thing.
Yep. No, that's a great point. Another question about about testing participants. If it's for an expert system with very special content that just wouldn't be understood outside of an organization, who do you use for that sort of initial test? Is there a good suggestion for a pilot there?
Oh, for a pilot.
Yeah, because you mentioned doing the first test to see if you messed anything up.
So most projects have some kind of subject matter expertise within the project, especially if you're doing expert, detailed niche content. You'll have somebody who is helping you understand it in the first place. Like if I went and did medical, legal, scientific things that I'd never worked with before, I'm going to need someone to help me understand it. So that can be the people that you trial it with, because you're looking for mistakes in your process more than the outcomes of the sort. You're making sure your instructions make sense and that you haven't duplicated a card, and that that the cards actually kind of make sense. So yeah, anybody who and that's usually going to be somebody on the project who is helping you understand, is probably the best person. Good question.
Yep. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So can you talk a little bit about the difference between affinity diagram technique and a card sort? If you're using a small group. That's from Andrea.
Yep. An affinity diagram comes out of user research usually, or any kind of activity where you've collected lots of detailed insights. And in an affinity diagramming session, the project team usually will be putting things together that go together. So the concept is the same in that we're trying to put things that go together in bundles that go together. The difference is a card sort you're doing with users and you're doing with content for something like your website, intranet, app. So the actual process of putting things that go together is the same, but the people are different and the content is different. And with an affinity diagram, we aren't usually trying to come up with an information architecture. We're trying to see patterns in the user research results. But yeah, the putting stuff that goes together is really similar.
Got it. And then Vivian asks a similar question. Can you use cluster analysis to analyze the card sorting results?
If you have the statistical nous to do a cluster analysis, you can. It will help you see similarities across a large data set. I will still ask you to do those qualitative things though. So I've done a lot of cluster analysis, and I'm doing, I do that work because I work with data science teams. So I do a lot of cluster analysis. And the thing with cluster analysis is you look at the clusters and you're like, interesting. I don't know what to think about that. Why did that happen? So you still need to do the qualitative, why did this happen? But yes, if you know how to run it and you know the stats, you absolutely can. But I just don't recommend it for everybody because you need to know statistics. And my book has a whole chunk about running cluster analyses in Excel because I had to figure out how to do that.
Yeah, no, it sounds like that age old, the quant's going to tell you what, but the qual tells you why. So
yeah,
yeah,
it'll help, especially if you have done an online sort with lots of people. The cluster analysis really will tell you those kind of pairwise groups of things. But yeah, you still need the qual.
I agreed. Sticking with the statistical questions, just we'll talk about statistics for a minute. Armel asks, since the info isn't statistical or isn't statistically significant, is it okay to modify the cards from one participant to another or one group to another?
Yeah.
Or does that bias? Or I mean, is that,
No.
do you recommend for it or against it?
So here you go back and say, what is the goal of my card sort? What do I want to learn here? Would that matter? So yeah, if you want to learn interesting things about how people think, and you've got different kinds of people who might use different kinds of content on a site, it doesn't have to be a one-off activity. So yeah, you can definitely do that as long as you're not trying to analyze the results in one pile. So yep, use all techniques and methods to get out of them what you need and not worry about being perfect.
Got it. Do what you got to do.
Yeah.
We had a couple of great questions about the actual groups themselves. How big is a small group? when you're actually in a room together? Yeah.
Sorry, I should have said that. Do you know what? I'm really not usually very black and white about things. I'm usually like, oh, it depends about that. 3 people.
3 people. So you want 3 participants, exactly 3. Love it.
To 5.
Oh. Oh, you were so close, Donna.
So I was so close to giving an exact answer.
I know.
Here's what.
3 to 5.
Here's
3 to 5. Let's say 4. Okay.
4 is good as well. The thing to watch out for, more than that, and a couple of people will do it, and some people will stand back and watch. 3s work really well. So 2s, you've just got 2 people bouncing off each other. Throw in a 3rd, and you've got 3 people bouncing off each other and contributing, and it changes the dynamic entirely. Above 5, and people leave like 3 people to do the work.
Interesting. Well, that's funny because the next question was going to be, for an in-person exercise, how do you facilitate to ensure strong personalities aren't just driving the whole thing, and it's not just, me standing there going, no, bananas go here.
People do that, and it's just a facilitator skill, isn't it? What do you think about that? Do you agree? Could you help me with these things over here? I don't find it happens a lot though. Like especially with groups of 3 to 5 people, is small enough that everybody can get in, and also that trick of spreading the cards out on the table, of not letting somebody control the cards. And if people, so even if you've got somebody kind of trying to control, if people care enough, they will eventually pick up something and they'll go, no, it doesn't go there, it goes there.
Got it.
But yeah,
got it.
It can happen, and it's a facilitator skill to get everybody involved.
So we only have time for one more question. I'm looking for an interesting, this one I thought was really interesting from Philip. What if I already know the groups and I want to find out which items should appear in the groups? Is a card sort of valid method to find that out?
No.
Okay. We have a definite answer.
I didn't include this. There is a technique called closed card sorting. A closed card sort is where you give people the categories and you ask them to put content into the categories. The reason I think this is not a valid technique is that people don't come to a website, application, intranet pile of content to put content in categories. They come to find things. So if you want to know, unless your goal is to find out what content would people put in those categories. So you might have that if you're working on a kind of document management system or any kind of filing system where people literally put content into categories, or if you're working on a classification. If you're working on things that people need to find information for themselves and you want to test out some groups, do a tree test instead. And in that, instead of saying what content goes in this group, you say, if you needed to find bananas, where would you look? And that's a better methodologically sound approach to finding out where people would look for things, because that's usually the task they're doing. But it's a really good question. It always comes up because there is this method called closed card sorting, and the shallow literature doesn't address it and just says, here's a method.
Got it. There's a related one, which is, can you give people empty cards so that they can add things?
Yeah, you can.
If you use? Okay.
Yeah, especially if you're working with people who know the content, you can ask them what also they might add, what else exists, have you missed anything important, and that will tell you interesting things. I don't think you can do it with the online tools though, so it's definitely face-to-face.
A little harder.
Yeah.
Okay, I know we're right at the hour. I have one more question that I really got to ask, and this is from a Katerina who says, what do we do next? What activities and methods usually follow card sorting and the analysis and synthesis? What do you do with it?
You draft your information architecture, if that's what you're doing this activity for, which is usually what we're doing it for. Draft one or more versions of an information architecture and test that draft IA. And you can test it via something like tree testing, which I've mentioned, or you can test it by making a prototype or something like that. So this usually, unless you're using the activity for a different method, which like I said, you might be trying to learn that these people think differently to those. And so the outcome is then communicating that to your organization. So why are you doing it in the first place? But usually we're trying to draft an IA, and usually then you're combining it with the content itself, the user research that you have, the goals of your project, all the other things to make one or more versions of the IA that you can then test.
Got it. And with that last question, it is time for us to wrap up today's webinar. So I want to thank you, Donna, so much for breaking that all down for us and telling us how to apply it to real projects. And thank you to everybody who joined us today, as well as those of you who will be watching this in the future. I hope it is lovely for you. And on the subject of the recording, please do keep an eye out for an email with the recording link in a few hours to stay updated about future masterclasses. You can subscribe to our newsletter and you will never miss one. Thank you and have a great day, evening, night, whatever, everyone. Thanks again.
Thank you.